Good morning, class. Today we'll be talking about fluoroscopy and image intensification. As you can see here in this slide, this is a fluoroscopy room. We've talked about this a little bit in the past, and you can see that there is one tube up here, but down on the bottom there is another tube. This is a remote room because it can be controlled entirely from the outside. There's a foot pad over here for fluoro to actually be activated. So let's just get a start and talk about what we're going to talk about. So we're going to talk about the fluoroscopic imaging definition, as well as what our role as a technologist is, as well as what the radiologist will be doing. We'll talk a lot about the imaging chain. In other words, how do we get from an X-ray to an image in fluoroscopy? We'll talk about the image intensification tube, which is a great part of that. It's a new tube, so it has some similarities to an X-ray tube, but it's not an X-ray tube. It's an image intensifier tube, also known as an II tube. And we will talk a little bit about the inside of that tube, and we'll get into the details, such as the overall structure, the input screen, the photocathode, the electrostatic lenses, and the anode, which sounds familiar, right? Anode. We'll also talk about some methods to increase the brightness of an image. Right, so that's brightness gain as well as magnification gain. And I skipped over magnification. We'll talk about the ways that one can magnify the image. Towards the end of the of the presentation, we'll talk about the fluoroscopic equipment, the carriage underneath, the difference between a remote over-table system, as well as some protection considerations for the patient and staff, such as how we would shield, making sure that we have the proper distance and protective apparel. So the rationale for fluoroscopy is to move away from an image that is purely static, as we would have on a normal X-ray. We want to be able to follow barium moving around, or an object maybe coated with barium. So for example, if you took a cracker and put some barium onto it, gave that to the patient to swallow under a fluoroscopic guidance, we would then be able to watch this go down the trachea into the patient's stomach, etc. So it's really to observe anatomy in motion. It could also be utilized to locate the position and look at anatomical structures. It gives the radiologist a lot of flexibility that we don't have generally as a technologist, whereas they can oblique the patient, for example. They could get them just into the right obliquity for them to possibly see what they're interested in, whereas we go by standard measurements and angles with which to provide our overheads with. Fluoroscopy historically has been around for quite a while. Was created by Thomas Edison. Yes, the same very light bulb personality, so he is heavily involved in our field of radiology as well. So your role as a technologist. Well, if you see over here, this is actually radiologist or physician. Wouldn't be the technologist, because he's wearing these red goggles, and those were designed to try to improve the brightness. Fluoroscopy procedures were generally done in very dark areas. Now with the image intensification tubes that we have, as well as the monitors giving us nice bright images, there's no use any longer for these types of glasses to be worn. Now, our role as a technologist is that we will be assisting the physician, right? Basically, we will do everything that needs to be assigned to us other than actually fluoring. So that may be assisting with the exam, getting the preparation of barium together, putting patients on the table, running and setting up the machine in terms of frames per second so that fluoro can be done. Nowadays, often we are found outside of the room monitoring the procedure from the outside on a separate set of monitors. In the past, when we had to take, or I should say, when the physician would want a static image, so move away from that movie-like fluoro to a static image, we would have to pass them a cassette or put it into the fluoroscopic carriage, which would allow them to temporarily take a static view out of one of the fluoroscopic views. In other words, if they saw something that they wanted to capture, they could take basically a regular diagnostic x-ray utilizing a smaller size cassette than what we would normally use. We'll talk later on about how this process has switched from a conventional type of fluoroscopy, which I've been describing, to more of a digital type of fluoroscopy, where images are captured in a digital format and there's no need for cassettes. So some of the duties that uh, we would do as a technologist would be to prepare the equipment and supplies, explain a procedure to the patient. Um, Generally, most of the fluoroscopy examinations that we would be involved in, such as a barium enema series or a GI series, would require that we do what's known as a scout image, a preliminary image, KUB, to see if a patient has prepped accordingly, right? And that there is no fecal matter that would interrupt the flow of barium and possibly obscure pathology. In that case, after viewing that image, a radiologist would determine whether the exam could continue or not and need to be rescheduled. Fluoroscopy is also utilized in the field of angiographic procedures, right? If you see here, this is a separate, different type of machine known as a C-arm apparatus. It also has a image intensifying unit, uh, although this one looks to be a digital system that has a flat panel detector instead of an II. The image intensifier unit that we'll talk about and you'll see in the next few slides kind of looks like a big cylinder, whereas you can tell that there's a flat panel detector uh, if you see a sort of square rectangle up here. Right, so our x-rays are coming from down here. Here's our x-ray tube through the patient onto this and captured by the flat panel detector. So fluoroscopy is really useful if we want to see motion. Right, it's going to follow the path of fluids through barium, but in this example here of a special procedure, generally we're not putting barium into a patient, but we're putting some type of contrast media in via an injection, either by a machine or potentially by hand into a catheter, so that we can investigate the blood vessels. So let's talk a little bit about some of the equipment and the imaging chain. Right, the fluoroscopic room has a little bit extra than what you would typically see in a regular X-ray room. Well, for one, you have an additional set of monitors, flat panel monitors generally, that are usually hanging from the ceiling down. Our ceiling mounted X-ray tube is usually put off to the side. So this tube in here we're not even really going to be using. But you can see here there is a fluoroscopic carriage. There's a handle here so that a radiologist can move this up and down the patient. And down here, what you have is your actual fluoroscopic x-ray tube under the table. So this image intensifier that I keep talking about that kind of looks like a cylinder is housed inside of this unit. Doesn't look very cylindrical here because this is the outside housing. Okay, we have to take our cassette tray, or could be a flat panel detector or a bucky, and we have to move it temporarily out of the way. So our patient would be situated on this table and using something known as ABC, or automatic brightness control, which is a computer program that will allow the physician to basically move this fluoroscopic carriage from areas of thick parts to thinner parts or vice versa, and not have to automatically go outside and change the technique to adjust for a thicker or thinner part. So it happens automatically, right? Imagine if you had to run in and out to change the technical factors. You wouldn't really get a very dynamic study that way. So in fluoroscopy, we have an X-ray tube, right, that is going to produce our X-rays, but we also have a second tube, and that's known as our image intensifier tube, right? It's going to convert an X-ray image to a image of visible light, right? At the same time, just based on its design, this image that is visible, right, it's going to show up on a monitor, is going to be brighter and a little bit smaller, right? So the intensified image is going to be received by what's known as a video camera, so it could be sent to a monitor, right? And it could also be sent to a computer that can be storing images in a digital manner. So again, fluoroscopy is going to be continuous. So in terms of exposure time, can vary greatly, which is why they have set up alarms where if the fluoro goes for approximately 5 minutes, an audible sound will be made so that people who are fluoring are aware that they've been fluoroing for a little bit of time. The typical MA range you'll see is actually very low. It's only 0.5 to 5 MA, and our KV is typically 100 KV or higher, and that's to penetrate the barium sulfide. Right? There's also a Bucky slot cover very often, and there are some protective curtains. You have to imagine that in front of the curtain you're going to have the physician or the radiologist that's doing the fluoro. Not only would they be wearing an apron, but this will give them a little bit of extra protection. If you were to be in the room, you should make sure that you are behind the physician. Of course, you would be wearing an apron as well. But as I've mentioned, the majority of the exams that are happening nowadays, you are typically actually outside of the room, so you should be receiving the minimum amount of radiation possible. Now, our image intensification tube, which to back up, and I don't know why this is upside down. Let me see if I can fix that. It's a little weird. There we go. No, it doesn't like that. Okay, we're almost there. Sorry, folks. We're doing this live, right? Okay. There we go. Just make that a little bit bigger. Okay. So this is what I meant by your image intensifier unit kind of looking like a cylinder, almost like a big milk bottle. And you can see there is a chain of events. Right? We're going to start with X-rays, and we're going to end up with light. And to take it a step further, our video tube is going to be out here somewhere. Right? But right now I'm concentrating just on this image intensifier unit. So this is going to convert our X-ray to a light image, right? And it's going to go through a process where our image is going to become brighter, so we don't need to use those funky red glasses that we saw before. And that light that comes out, as mentioned, can be captured or received by a video camera, and once upon a time that video could be recorded by, let's say, a VCR. But now more commonly in the digital environment, as we discussed last week in our CRDR lecture, we can capture that light with a CCD, a charged coupled device. Right? That charged coupled device will then be able to convert that light information into electrical signals and ultimately a digital image. But let's back up and take the steps and look at some of the parts that are involved in an image intensifier tube. Right, similar to an X-ray tube, we have a cathode side and an anode side. Right, so where our input window and our input phosphor, so think input is where things are going to be starting, output or where things are going to be ending, so our chain of events will be going from left to right. We start with X-rays. They come into an input phosphor, and a conversion is going to occur there. Right? Our input phosphor is going to turn those X-rays into light. All right, we're going to see that we're going to have some different conversions, and we're actually going to have a conversion to light twice in the system. The photocathode is another phosphor, so we have two phosphors that are kind of sandwiched together as indicated by these two lines, one sort of pink and a light blue line. Right? The input phosphor is made out of cesium iodide, and it's going to convert those X-rays into light. So as we learned last week, we can call this type of phosphor a scintillator. Then our process, and we'll talk about this process a couple more times as we go through this. Our light will then interact almost immediately, right? Because they're sandwiched together with what's known as the photocathode. Photocathode is going to take our light, similar to what happens in the digital environment that we discussed again last week. It's going to take that light and turn it into electrons. And those electrons are then going to fly across this tube. They're focused by what's known as the electrostatic lenses. You see these in green. And these electron stream is kind of funneled or squeezed, kind of like going from a large hose to a straw. Right? So we're going to kind of condense that beam, squash it a bit, and it's going to hit this output phosphor, which you can see is much smaller in diameter because they are circular in nature. So everything in here is kind of like a circle as a cylinder. And again, we're going to have a conversion, except now instead of X-rays to light, we're going to turn these electrons to light. And they're going to exit this output window, and as mentioned, they will be received by either a video camera or a charged coupled device. So here is our image again. Just wanted to show you the image from a different perspective, but if you can see here, this is what I was talking about. Our electrons are being condensed into a much finer point.
Actually, no, I didn't say it was just